Even before Turok Dinosaur Hunter had been released, Acclaim had already stated that a sequel would follow. I think it was even a surprise to Acclaim just how well received the first game was. Critics praised the amazing graphics for the time and the evolution of the first-person genre. The problem Acclaim then faced with the always challenging sequel was to up the ante. However, this time around they were not only up against their original work, but Rare's masterpiece GoldenEye, which had thrown out the rulebook and made a genre-defining game of its time. Acclaim were not fazed and surprisingly kept a team of around 18 staff to make the follow-up Turok 2 Seeds of Evil. Picking up where the first game's story finished, Turok 2 sees you take control of Joshua Fireseed some 150 years later. After a somewhat convoluted storyline sequence, you set about taking down the ancient Primogen and bringing order back to the world. Turok 2 is yet again another violent first-person shooter, and it pushes the N64 hardware to its limits, and sometimes even over it. The huge difference this time around was the support for the expansion pack. Acclaim had received an N64DD dev kit during the game's development and began to experiment with ways to take advantage of the RAM expansion pack. Firstly, they upped the game's resolution to 640 by 480 and showcased this to Nintendo at E3 in 1998. Acclaim were so secretive of the fact they were using the expansion pack in this way, they told IGN in a preview event for the game that they were actually looking at the game in the console's standard resolution. The game was originally intended to fit onto a 12 meg cart, however when the price of 16 meg carts fell, they pushed the game onto a 16 meg cart and added the multiplayer mode. After missing its original production run, Acclaim once more upped the ante and they were finally put into production on 32 meg carts. Now the cart sizes changed so frequently that it was actually sent out to magazines for review on 3 32 meg cartridges. My beloved N64 magazine even questioned how the game was going to fit onto a single 32 meg cart for the game's release. After over 100,000 hours of beta testing, the game was just released in time for Christmas. The demand was so high in fact that it sold out almost everywhere across the world on its release, and I remember having to wait until January to play the game despite my sister pre-ordering it as a Christmas gift for me and my brother months before. The first thing that struck me in the game was how its graphics looked, and this was a case for reviewers of the time too. To put it simply, this was a great looking game for its time, and the expansion pack added a whole new level of texture quality and depth which few games had shown before. There was however a big drawback. With this new level of detail, the game stutters at times and suffers from horrific slowdown. There are moments when the game dazzles with its visuals but then almost comes to a halt when a few enemies begin to enter their attack modes. It was disappointing, but it never ruined the game for me. Luckily there is the option to play the game in the low res mode, which certainly helps the frame rate, however the dip in visuals is quite noticeable and it takes away from the overall presentation. The animation is excellent. The enemies with their fantastic AI move fluidly and are believable. Add to this some beautiful lighting, water, fog and particle effects, and it's hard to think of a single graphical trick Acclaim didn't pull off in this title. Now one big criticism of Turok 1 were the size of the levels. Gamers often found that they could become lost very easily, and I assumed that this time around they would have shrunken the levels down somewhat. In fact, quite the opposite happened. The levels this time around are even larger, but thankfully grouped into areas by warps. This does make navigating the game slightly easier, but unless you pay attention again you'll find that's perhaps easy to get lost, and you will lose track of your progress. It's also not possible to complete the level without finding everything, which means that you will often get to the finish gate only to find that you've missed something and have to travel all the way back on a seek mission. The game's 6 worlds are all unique, and the variation in scenery and settings is beautiful. As you progress through the game, they gradually become darker and take on a horror feel to them. The personal highlight for me in the game was the sheer amount of weapons. No joke, I think this could perhaps have had the best selection and variation of weapons on any first-person shooter ever. There is nothing more satisfying than picking up the flamethrower and going crazy like a NAM veteran. Well actually, there is something more satisfying: the cerebral bore. The cerebral bore is infamous as perhaps being the coolest gun ever made. During a brainstorming session, the idea was put forward for a Leech Gun. This idea was shot down, but it would later return in Turok 3. The idea, however, did get worked on, and the cerebral bore was born. The gun locks onto your enemy, fires a high-speed drill into their brains, and then you'll then see the enemy running around in agony, screaming, before the head pops off and they fall to the ground in a crimson mess, and I absolutely love it. There is also a special weapon, the nuke, which is broken down into pieces which you must find scattered throughout the entire game. It adds a sense of exploration and encourages you to venture off the beaten track to search for it. The power it wields is worth the hunt. Either that or just use the all weapons code and experience its might. Now there were those who didn't care for the soundtrack in Turok 1. It was very atmospheric, but this time around Acclaim went for something a little bit more symphonic, and the result is a score that wraps itself around the action and works perfectly. The game also has a ton of well-voiced dialogue, and each world has you entering a long transitional video sequence which sets about the mood for the mission. The sound effects are top-notch too, and if you have a solid sound system, this is the game for you. The weapons all sound distinct and crisp, and the high-speed drilling sound of the cerebral bore will take you straight to memories of being in a dentist chair. It really is that good. Whilst there is no surround sound support option, the stereo setting works well and can at times help you locate enemies that you've yet to see. One letdown for me was the multiplayer. I really was hoping for a GoldenEye killer, but for me personally the game tries to copy all of GoldenEye's modes but never surpasses it. The map design is a little confusing and could have done with some more work to make them feel as fluid and enjoyable as its competition. There is also no music in the multiplayer. This was taken out to help the game's frame rate, and this worked really well. Aside from huge explosions, it remains solid, and you can even play 2-player mode in high res, which is very impressive. Now despite some minor flaws, the game sold incredibly well. Just under 2 million copies were ordered by retailers before its release, and the game went on to sell over 1 million copies in North America. That may not sound that impressive by today's standards, but for a third-party N64 game that was remarkable back in its day. I have some great memories of ploughing my way through Turok 2 on cold winter nights after school, and after finally completing the game, I have had a huge sense of achievement. The game is huge, and it's not a game you'll find that you'll beat and blitz through quickly. If you haven't played Turok 2 already, then I think you should. If you can get over the frame rate issues and the sometimes confusing levels, you have one of the best first-person shooters on the console, and one which you really shouldn't miss out on. But I've drawled on and off over Turok 2, so it's over to you. Hit me with your memories and experiences of Turok 2 in the comments down below, and whilst you're there, tell me about your first thoughts when you killed someone with the sublime cerebral bore. And as always, thanks for watching, and until next time.